A war that ended in 1453 helped decide who sits in the White House in 2024. Sounds crazy. It's true. Not through a curse, not through fate. Through a real, traceable chain of documents and decisions that took 500 years to finish falling. Here's every step, in order. On May 29th, 1453, the army of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II broke through the walls of Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, the last living piece of ancient Rome, ended in a single morning. That's your trigger event. Your endpoint is stranger. The 2024 United States presidential election, decided by a margin so thin in 3 states that fewer than 230,000 votes out of over 150 million cast, changed who became president. Here's the first domino. Constantinople had been the last great library of the ancient Greek world. As the Ottoman threat closed in, Greek scholars began moving west, carrying manuscripts with them. Manuel Chrysoloras had already left for Florence in 1397 to teach Greek. Cardinal Bessarion, Byzantine-born, settled permanently in Italy by 1440 and kept collecting. When the city fell, that trickle became an exodus. Why does that matter? Because they weren't just fleeing, they were carrying cargo nobody in Italy had ever read firsthand. Bessarion rose to become a cardinal of the Catholic Church, and for a brief stretch, a serious candidate for pope, all while buying and copying every Greek manuscript he could save before it disappeared for good. Here's the second domino. Bessarion's library became the founding core of the Bibliotheca Marciana in Venice. Historian Deno Giannakopoulos documented how these scholars didn't just hand over old books. They taught Italians to read them in the original Greek, correcting centuries of garbled Latin. For the first time in the West, thinkers could read a nearly lost historian named Polybius without a translator's guesswork in the way. That's where it gets interesting. Polybius had a theory about why Rome hadn't collapsed like most republics. Power was split 3 ways: consuls, senate, and people, each one checking the others. A mixed constitution. For over 1,000 years, almost nobody in the West could read his full argument. Now they could. Quick pause. Does any of this sound familiar yet? It should. Here's the third domino, and this is where the idea gets exported. By the 1700s, that recovered theory had worked its way into the Enlightenment. Montesquieu built the spirit of the laws partly around it, crediting Polybius by name. He didn't invent checks and balances. He translated a Byzantine-preserved Roman idea into a modern one. Here's the fourth domino, and it crosses the Atlantic. James Madison in Philadelphia in 1787 called Montesquieu the oracle who is always consulted on separation of powers. In Federalist number 47, he traced the argument back to Polybius directly. In Federalist number 68, Madison and Alexander Hamilton used that same logic to reject a simple national popular vote for president. Unchecked democratic power was exactly what mixed constitution theory warned against. Their answer was the Electoral College, a state-by-state system that weighted small states above their population. Not corruption, not an accident. Checks and balances theory, inherited from Rome by way of Constantinople, poured into constitutional concrete. Stay with this. One more step ties it to the maps you see on election night. Here's the fifth domino. Each state's electoral votes track its seats in the House, and House seats sit inside congressional district lines redrawn once a decade. Political scientist Jonathan Rodden documented how that district system, layered over a country where one party's voters cluster tightly in cities, structurally rewards whoever is spread out more evenly. Combine that with an electoral college built the same way, state lines instead of raw votes, and the number of places that can actually decide a presidency keeps shrinking. Analysts call what's left the swing states. Here's the sixth domino, the one that lands on 2024. Donald Trump won the national popular vote by just 1.5 percentage points, one of the tightest margins in modern history. But the presidency wasn't decided by that number. It was decided in Wisconsin by 0.86%, in Michigan by 1.42%, in Pennsylvania by 1.71%. Fewer than 230,000 ballots across 3 states, in a country of over 330 million people. Analysts at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics and the Brookings Institution both flagged the same thing once the votes were counted. None of that happens without the structure underneath it. No electoral college, no swing state math, no Madison and Hamilton building on a theory neither of them invented, no Montesquieu reading Polybius in a language he trusted, no Renaissance humanists retranslating Greek texts, no libraries worth of manuscripts crossing the Adriatic in the arms of scholars like Bessarion, and no exodus like that without an army breaking through a wall in 1453. Here's the part that should unsettle you. None of these people were building toward each other. Mehmet II wasn't thinking about American elections. Madison wasn't drafting Article 2 with Byzantine refugees in mind. Each one solved the problem directly in front of them. The chain only exists in hindsight, one document, one idea, one compromise at a time. That's how real history actually moves, not in straight lines. In chains like this one, indirect and structural, built out of decisions nobody thought were consequential at the time. Think about how many links had to hold. A sultan had to want a city badly enough to build cannons no army had used before. A handful of scholars had to choose exile over staying behind. A room full of delegates in a Philadelphia summer had to decide, against a simple popular vote, that Polybius and Montesquieu were right. Break any one link, and the Electoral College doesn't exist the way you know it. Break that, and Wisconsin's 29,397 votes never become the whole election. So the next time you hear an election decided by a margin smaller than a college class, in 3 states instead of 50, remember where that structure came from. Not a scandal, not a conspiracy. A conquered city, a handful of scholars carrying books nobody else could read, and an idea about balance that refused to stay buried for 500 years. A siege in 1453 didn't just end an empire. It helped decide who lives in the White House in 2024. If this chain of dominoes surprised you, there's another one waiting. Like and subscribe, next time you'll see it coming.